Morning, everybody. Welcome to another round of coffee and questions. What's today's topic? We're going to go back to the wood lathe. I came across a tree that somebody was cutting down, a neighbor. Wasn't sure. I'm pretty sure it's a version of pine. Somebody goes, no, it's oak. Well, I live in desert cities and I don't really think it's oak. But it looked like it was a fresh cut. Didn't have a lot of cracking on it. Thought I could do something with it. I'm going to pan around. I'm going to show you the cutoff section of the tree. Okay, so I went ahead and I cut this down, and I cut it into a square block by cutting off the bark also. Then I used a Forstner bit, 1 inch in diameter, because it was what matches my spur drive. And I went ahead and I countersunk a little hole here, probably about a 1/2 inch deep. And that's what I'm going to use to mount it on the lathe here at the headstock, and then I'll bring the tailstock up from the bottom part. So I'll be back with you in a minute as soon as I get it mounted. Okay, everybody, so we're back, and so now what's happened is we mounted it the same way we did in the last videos. I created a tenon, put it on here. I had the tailstock up here. I took off a piece right here, which is what I'm going to use to make a top for the vessel when we're done. So I went ahead and I rough shaped it. Now I'm going to take a drill that I have, and I'm going to drill a hole here down to the final depth. So I will let you watch me do that, and then we'll proceed with the project. Now I'm going to take the drill. I got a Bosch drill. It's got an auger bit. There's a depth gauge over here. And we're going to figure that right there is pretty close. Okay, now the next step is I'm going to go ahead and move my tool rest up here, and I'm going to use this. It's an indexing tool. And I use that to do the initial hollowing. Not to get it to the thickness, the wall thickness, but I use it to hog out a lot of the material going down through here. Now I leave the walls on this thick. Then when I start the hollowing, I'll start by getting my wall thickness up at the top and work my way down towards the bottom. Okay. All right, everybody, it's morning, and so what did we do? Well, what we concluded was I put that piece of pine. I figured out it was pine after I cut into it. I put it on the lathe. We made the vessel. I used the index tool that I showed you, and I began to hollow it out. So everything I've done is the same as that previous video. So if you want to see it in detail, go back to the previous video where we did the other vessel, and then you can take a look, and I show you every single step I went through. Now this one also had the pith dead center, and that's where it's going to crack every single time. So I didn't have wood big enough to be able to cut the pith out and still make, a nice turning blank. So I have to control that pith the best I can. And I showed you how to do that in the last video, but we'll repeat it. I used stick fast right here. This is CA glue. Harbor Freight stuff, that's not anything I would use for this kind of a project. CA glues are not manufactured the same. So I use stick fast or Starbond. Okay, that's what I use. Anyway, I drip it down in here. I take a Forstner bit, and it has a little bit of like a drill bit on the end, about like that. And then the rest of it's the Forstner bit. So when I bored that hole with that auger bit, I came back later on, and I've got an extension. I used that Forstner bit and I sunk it in there, and it gave me a little bit of like a drill depth, just a little bit like that. So now when I drop that CA glue in there, I filled all that, and it should solidify real hard, that whole pith area. Now on the outside, I got it all the way down to here. Let me zoom in and show you. This will be the bottom. So I'm all the way with that point to about right here, to about just a little less than 1/2 inch. Okay, now I measured it, and I'm certain that that's where we're at when I take this off and we complete the bottom. And then I'll put some CA glue on the bottom. So I put it on the inside, I put it on the outside in that real kind of thin drilled out little hole area that I'm telling you about, and that should solidify this to where I don't get any cracking. Now, it should work. With pine, pine is a different kind of wood. It actually dries very quickly, especially I live out here in desert cities, and it tends to crack very easily. So this is a little bit different than the mesquite wood that I use, which is a more hardy, it's a stronger kind of a wood, and that's the one that we used in the last video, but this is the one where a neighbor cut down a tree, they gave me a chunk of it, this is what we turned, or I turned. So this is where we're at right now, and then while it was on the lathe, in that one big piece, I went ahead and I cut off this piece. Now this we're just going to hang on to for later. Now I soak this pretty good by spraying it down with mineral spirits, and I keep it in this dry bag. Okay, now I'm not going to be able to get back to this now for probably a couple of days, and so I don't want to leave it just sit out and dry at its own pace, because the odds are it's going to crack. So what I'm going to do is I have a spritz bottle, one you get from the dollar store. Let me show you. Yep, here we go. It's just a spick and span container. Spick and span's gone. I filled it with the mineral spirits, and I just sit here, and inside and outside I dampen it all the way around, on the inside and the outside. Now once I've got this thing soaked down, I'll put it too into this plastic bag, and then I'll secure it around the neck down here. I just tie it. You can put a rubber band, whatever you want to do, and then that way, between the mineral spirits being kind of soaked on there, or at least dampened real good, and the bag over it, it will not dry out fast. It will dry out very, very slow, and hopefully it doesn't crack. But we'll be back in a couple of days, and I take this off and we start the sanding process, and we'll get to see together. Now I might, after 24 hours, take this bag off and spritz it again to control the moisture evaporation from the wood. I don't want it to, evaporate too fast, like I said. So every 24 hours I could just lift this off, spritz it real fast, put the bag back on, but in 2 days we'll come back. Now I had a couple of questions in there. Somebody said in the last video, well, you got the lathe and you have all these tools and blah blah blah. I go, well, I didn't have them all in the beginning. And if you remember in the last video, I showed you, you can make one of these. It's just a 2x2 with a dowel through it, and I can go down like this in here, and I can adjust this even when it's on the lathe. You pull it out, that's your depth. You can set it here on the side, and you can eyeball down exactly how deep you are. So I don't need any special expensive tools to do that. Now another thing I did along those lines when I was first turning, and like I said, I didn't have the money to go out and buy all this stuff, and if I did, I didn't want to spend it, is I wanted to create a couple of different tool rests rather than the one long one. You do use that one most of the time, but I wanted a couple of others for making bowls, and when you make a little bit larger bowls. So what I did, I got some contractor stakes, and I have a welder, but if you don't have a welder, you can find somebody to do it for $5 or so. You get a contractor stake, and I put this on a 1-inch round solid piece of steel, and then that would just go down into the tool rest. All right, so, and then I have this big curve here, and then I thought, well, the guy that did the welding did it for like $5 or $10, whatever it was, and so I said, hey, can you make me another one and make it in a bigger arc? So we turned around, made another one. It looks like this, huge arc. So I can adjust this to the inside curvature of a bowl when I'm, when I have the tool here and I'm coming in, and I can create, the depth on that bowl without monkeying around with that straight one. Now I also had him do one more. Let me show you. Okay, I had him make me just this one out of round bar stock because I had it left over. I went out to a steel supplier locally. You could do the same thing. Asked them if they have a scrap pile or a scrap area. They pointed me to the direction, and so I got the steel. The contractor stakes, I think I got at Home Depot or something, but this round bar steel, I think I only paid like $5, and I got I don't know how many feet of it. So he made me this one, and he made me the other two curved ones. So that's another way, and they work perfectly fine without spending hundreds of dollars on some fancy tool rest. So choice is yours. Now another question somebody said or asked me out at the club is like when they turn a bowl, because sometimes they don't have very thick material and they hollowed it out, how do you know how close you're getting, to the bottom? Now, assuming you have a tenon on there or, what have you in the chuck jaws like I do, what you can do, I went down to the hardware store, I looked online, and I saw a tool that somebody was selling, and I thought, well, I know how to make that. So for about $2, I went down to the hardware store and I got this aluminum rod. And all I did is I just bent it right here. No particular distance, this is probably about 1 inch. And I bent this arc and then I made it straight. And then you get this little coupler right here that they'll sell you at the hardware store. And that's where the aluminum goes in. And then I got one that's straight and I put a little piece of dowel rod here on the end. Okay, so how does this work? Well, I slide the straight bar all the way up to where the two are touching, like that, and I put a black mark right up here. Now with that black mark, that tells me I'm at 0, okay, because they're touching. So now I turn around, lift this up, and I come around. If this was a bowl, say it's not a vessel, but it's a bowl, and I want to figure that out, I come down here and I just put this in between my chuck jaws. There's slots in here, and I bring it up to where it's touching the wood, drop this down, and that visually will tell you how much more material you have left before, the bottom of the bowl. What his concern was is if he's making it like, I don't know, like 1/2 inch thick or whatever, a salad bowl or something, how do you know if you got also like a 1/2 inch or so towards the bottom? Well, this is an easy way to do it. Costs $2. I still use it, but I mean, it's up to you. Some of these tools, they're very easy to make. You can weld them yourself at home. At the time when I did it, I didn't have a good enough welder to do that, especially that thick of material. But the guy was nice enough. I mean, he did them about $5 a piece, so 5, 10. So for about $15, and I provided the steel and the stakes already bent. He just went ahead and welded them, and it was worth it to me because, like I said, for that cheap, you can't beat it. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead, we're gonna soak this like I said, I'm gonna wrap it like I said. I'll see you in a couple of days.